spoke to Thomas Swarbrick about the fact that British farmers are producing a lot less food. And this is happening largely because of Brexit. Other factors, for instance, the weather and the Ukraine war, are exacerbating matters. But the real driving force is Brexit. When the Conservatives decided to do Brexit, they wanted it because they wanted to diverge from EU standards and do a deal with the USA. And that is why we have a hard border with the EU and with Northern Ireland, so that we can accept lower standard goods, and those goods won't go into the single market because those borders are there to protect the EU. However, we have never actually got around to diverging, and this was conceded by Nigel Farage recently on GB News.
Criticisms of the Conservatives since Brexit was finally delivered is we haven't really diverged at all, have we?
No, we haven't, but we have got the ability to do it. Now, let's look at what Keir Starmer actually said himself in his manifesto about what should happen with the European Union. He said every single part of the Brexit deal needs renegotiation, whether that's free movement, whether that's joining the European army, whatever it may be. His own manifesto says he is going to renegotiate every single part of the Brexit deal. And do not forget that deal, conveniently enough for him, comes up for review in 2026. And what this is, I'm sorry, Russell, but, what this is softening the British public up with nice things. Of course, we'll want our kids to be able to go and study in Spain and Portugal and wherever else it may be. In Germany. It is for softening the British public up. He and his civil service chums know they've got a year to work on us for, ultimately, in my view, a Brexit betrayal in 2026.
And now that we have a Labour government with Keir Starmer, who is also still being two-faced about what the intentions are. On the one hand, they say they want to align closer to EU regulations and the EU and reduce the trade barriers. On the other hand, they're still saying the unicorn nonsense about wanting to get trade deals with other countries like India and USA. We can't do both things. We either work to get rid of the friction between us and the EU, or we bite the bullet, diverge, and accept that we are importing most of our food from other countries outside of the EU. And that is the choice that was never properly put to the British public, because we know the British public have always been very supportive of upholding our high food, animal welfare and environmental standards. Brexit always meant lower standards. We're never honest about what the trade-offs of Brexit actually meant. News that inflation has fallen faster than anticipated, I'm sure, is welcomed by those who are hoping their interest rates will fall. However, hidden beneath this data is the fact that food inflation has actually gone up again. And the main reason for this is Brexit. First of all, Brexit is ensuring that British farmers are producing less food. Added to that, the food imports, which we're now becoming reliant on, are now subject to checks, costly checks, to come into Britain from the EU. And so those are the main drivers of the food inflation.
Down on the farm, times is tough. According to the president of the National Farmers Union, British farmers are scaling back food production in favour of alternatives such as rewilding or growing crops for biofuels to keep their businesses viable. Major cuts to subsidies for food and consecutive poor harvests are forcing the sector to seek less risky alternatives. This year will be the second worst harvest on record, with dramatic falls of more than 25% in yields of wheat, winter barley and oilseed rape. Liz Webster is beef and arable farmer and founder of Save British Farming. Thanks for coming on the programme, Liz. So just how bad has it been?
It's really dire, yeah. The worst in living memory, I'd say.
And how is that going to affect, ultimately, not just your businesses, but what's available on people's supermarket shelves?
Well, as long as we can always get imported food, the supermarket shelves are going to be okay. But you have to wonder, will that food always be available to import? And if we're importing more food, it does mean that as there's more crises across the globe, that food that we're importing is being taken from other poorer countries. And it also means we've lost our food security. And you don't need to nuke a country if you can interrupt their food imports, because you can hold them to ransom or starve them and make them weak, which is always the point we've been trying to get across for some time. That people say, I go to the supermarket and I've got loads of food, I can buy what I want. But you go to the supermarket, you look at your apples, it's peak season now for apples, and I bet you find it hard to find British apples and pears. Most of the food is coming in now, especially fresh food, from outside of the country, because the government are not incentivizing us to produce food. It's too risky to produce food. So, as you said, farmers are now doing other things to mitigate the risk, which means that we're not producing your food any longer. And if the geopolitical situation gets worse, then we are in a lot of trouble, particularly as we've severed ourselves off from the European Union, our big partners, which actually provide most of our imported food.
Is there a pot of money available to a farmer if the rain comes down too much or the sun doesn't shine at the right times that at least mitigates the worst edges of a loss if they're trying to grow food?
No, I mean, they've got these flood risks programmes. I mean, we applied for one. We have been underwater for months this year. We weren't able to drill our wheat. What we had drilled rotted. But we had computer says no when we submitted that application. So
even though you've been underwater,
a good headline. Yeah. Even though they said we weren't suitable, apparently.
Right.
But literally, we were underwater from October through until the spring.
And if it becomes impossible for you then to make any money planting wheat or barley or whatever it might be, would you have to look at rewilding alternatives, giving over the field to rewild it because that will pay you more money?
Yeah, I mean, that's what's happening. And it's a double-edged sword in that you've got Brexit problems, trade problems, price problems, because you've got more imported food coming in, which is cheaper. We've lost that support through the food subsidies. And so the government is saying, well, OK, we'll pay you to plant flowers. You get less, ultimately, not necessarily. I mean, if you have a good year, it might be less, but it's a lot less risky. So many farmers are saying, actually, stuff this, it's too much risk. Everything is against me, the imports, the weather, the government. So I'm just going to grab this for now. But there's still no clear pathway with it because they're only 3-year schemes. The new government have been almost silent on anything to do with the budget for farming. So it's a very, very difficult time. And farmers really don't know what to do. And if you're offered the opportunity to get money another way, you're going to take it.
Founder of Save British Farming. Alex is a first-time caller in Barnsley on this. You are a farmer, Alex, I understand.
Yes, hi Tom. I've
Hello,
just
mate.
parked up my tractor.
Oh, well
I'm
done.
just planting next year's wheat.
And how was this year's wheat?
This year's wheat was poor. We probably had about 3/4 of what we usually have, so short about a quarter. And that's partly due to the fact we've put about a third of our farm into wildflowers.
A third?
A third, yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's just much less risky. So we lost all of our oilseed rape this year. The whole lot was just eaten by a beetle. And that was due to, there's a special chemical that they put on the corn before it goes into the field. That's been banned. So we're now importing grain from Ukraine, which is doesn't have any of these.
So hang on, so the weevil or whatever it is that would otherwise have been killed off by this chemical wasn't killed off because the chemical got banned, so the weevil or whatever ate all the produce. And now you're importing it from Ukraine.
Well, we're not personally, but
no,
I think 200,000 tonnes of oilseed rape got imported. And they don't have any of these restrictions.
That's
so we're
crazy.
kind of pricing ourselves out of the market because it's cheaper from Ukraine and they don't have any of the,
Just finally, Alex, before I let you, I mean, it sounds like you're having to make money through other means. You're not making any honey. Would you encourage people to go into farming?
It's a lifestyle of which it's enjoyable, but if you want to make money, then probably not.
Appreciate the call. Thank you very much.
In terms of food that we currently don't accept from the United States into Europe because of safety concerns, is things like hormonally treated beef, hormonally treated milk, chicken which is decontaminated using chlorine, and also the big issue around GM foods.
Which, of course, was a huge debate here, and perhaps still would be. Have they not been available here before at all?
So in terms of GM foods, we don't permit GM foods for sale in the EU because they are not deemed to be safe products. Yet in the United States they've been widely accepted for a long period of time, and it's estimated now that more than 50% of all the food consumed in the US has some form of GM component in it.
In reality, though, won't a lot of people jump at the chance to buy cheaper meat, and that's what it'll mean?
And part of it is down to choice. Will we buy lower cost meat from outside of the UK, outside of Europe? But in terms, will people be given that choice in terms of will they be absolutely clearly know that meat was treated with hormonal growth promoters, and that becomes really difficult. The more processed the food, the less likely you are to know the source of the ingredients.
Is there an issue here about labelling as well and different standards in different countries?
Labelling will be a big issue, and often people say, let's give consumers a choice because it will be on the label. And often I use the example of a meat pizza. A meat pizza has about 40 different ingredients coming from 25 different countries. How could you possibly put onto the label where everything comes from? It's not feasible.
Now, you're in a way making an assumption this is a bad thing. Is there any hard evidence that these foods, for example, hormone-treated meat, are harmful in any way?
So hormone-treated meat was banned in Europe going back to the 1980s, and that was based on some really terrible things that happened, particularly in Italy, around hormone-treated poultry meat that badly affected young children. But that was because the hormones were not being used properly. A lot of the scientific evidence would say if the hormones are used properly, there is no health risks associated with it.
Now, we asked DEFRA to respond to some of these points. They said that any future trade deal must work for UK farmers, businesses and consumers. And they said any new products wishing to enter the UK market must comply with our rigorous legislation and standards. Does that reassure you?
Well, of course, our rigorous legislation and standards are European standards. What standards will we be using in the future? That would be my question, absolutely back to DEFRA.
So, presumably what you're saying is we'll have to have a whole new raft of regulations which are concentrating on the UK.
And that's absolutely right, because I think there will be massive pressure from the US to allow imports of many, many different food products into the UK. And how are we going to deal with that? It's a question that I've asked many people and I haven't got a straight answer yet.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and comment below. Let me know what you think.